All right. Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday morning. Welcome to the Choose Clean Water Coalition's latest training, Resilient Waters, Making the Clean Water Climate Change Connection. Thank you all for, again, joining us early on a Monday morning. And we're excited to host this training over this morning and then also Wednesday morning as well. All right. So let's dive into where this started. First of all, I think it's important to lay the groundwork of where climate change stands from a national perspective. The desire to address climate change is growing. Even just in the past 10 years, we've seen it grow from 30% of Americans to 52% wanting to do something. The desire for the country to address climate change. So that certainly is relevant to our work because and it's also worth mentioning that this isn't a surprise given that we're seeing evidence of the effects of climate change now.
Recording in progress.
Recordings in progress, great. We're seeing, just look at the onslaught of sunny day flooding that we're seeing in Hampton Roads. We'll hear about that, more about that shortly. So we know climate change is an issue, but going back to our bread and butter, everyone wants clean water. We'll hear more from Sarah Bucci from the Water Hub at Climate Nexus on Wednesday about this, but clean water is a big winner. Again, most of us know this, that it's enjoys support widespread across party lines, pretty much every demographic there is. Everyone loves clean water. And why this is relevant is because our work is climate change work. And missing this intersection has consequences because if we do emphasize this connection, it can help build support for clean water policies, helps build support among the members of our organizations. It can help with fundraising. There's a lot of ways that we can emphasize this connection for the benefit of our work for clean water. So what are we going to try to accomplish over the next over the 2 days of this training? Well, we're going to highlight 3 very different projects. These are different in the sense in regards to where they're focused. There's urban, suburban, and rural areas. 3 different bay states, the 3 main bay states of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. And the work takes many different forms. For example, look at this picture of cover crops up in Pennsylvania. You wouldn't look at a field of stubble and think it has anything to do with climate change, but it actually does. It has a lot to do with it. So we're going to hear more about that on Wednesday from our friends from Jeb and Jeff at the Lancaster Farmland Trust. So stay tuned for that one. And so hearing about these projects can inspire your organization. Maybe you're already doing projects like this, but you're not talking about it. So it's just a matter of changing your narrative. Or maybe your organization is looking for future projects to tackle, and these projects can serve as inspiration for that. And then secondly, for the purpose of the training is to provide some hard communication skills to be more effective at speaking at this intersection, which certainly we're encouraging y'all to do. But before we go any further, I just want to highlight the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, NFWF. Thanks to, well, I guess you could say thanks to COVID, we're here this morning because this funding was originally from our 2020 conference that didn't happen, unfortunately, but we provided many virtual trainings over the past year and a half. This is actually the last one of those. So we're really grateful to NFWF for all of their support. Just do want to do a quick overview of the training to give folks a lay of the land. So we're going to have Joe Rieger from the Elizabeth River Project present shortly. We are going to have a break between presentations. Then we're going to hear from Holly and Natalie from National Wildlife Federation, and then a teaser to encourage you to come on Wednesday morning of the communications training. And then same times on Wednesday morning, I'll hear from Jeff and Jeb from Lancaster Farmland Trust, have another break, and then dive into that communications training. All right, so just a few items for housekeeping. So we've all been doing Zoom for a while now, so we all know the basics. I don't need to go over those, but as a reminder, please make sure you're muted. When it comes to asking questions, we encourage folks to either hold on to your questions. You can ask them at the end. Each presentation will have time for Q&A at the end, or you can drop them into the chat. I'll be monitoring that. and I'll bring up those questions as time permits. No surprise here, I've kind of hinted at this already, but we do encourage you to attend both days. The training will build on each other, so we do encourage you to attend Wednesday as well as today. If that's not possible, we will be recording that so you can watch it later. And last but not least, complete the evaluation. So first of all, before I go any further, I want to mention that if you are planning to attend Wednesday, don't complete the training or don't complete the evaluation after today, but wait until Wednesday to provide your feedback. But if you are unable to make it Wednesday, I'll drop that link in the chat at the end of our time together this morning. And just want to add a note that we really do look at everyone's feedback. We really take it to heart when developing future trainings and events. So thank you in advance for just taking a few minutes to provide your thoughts, either the end of the day or hopefully end of the morning on Wednesday. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first presenter, Joe Rieger, the Deputy Director of Restoration for the Elizabeth River Project. He has been with the Elizabeth River Project for 18 years and has managed numerous wetland, oyster, and sediment restoration projects in both the Elizabeth and Lafayette Rivers. You can actually see him here with a big clump of oysters from the Lafayette River. And he's going to discuss one of the projects he's managed today, and the many impacts that project has had on local water quality, but also on improving ecosystem resilience and combating the negative impacts from climate change. And he's also going to share an exciting new project that the Elizabeth River Project has in the works. So with that, I'm going to stop my share, and Joe, you can take it away.
Great, thanks. And thanks for having me this morning. I'll bring this up. All right. Drew, does that look good?
Yes, looks great.
Great. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And first, I'd like to just thank Drew for having me. I'm going to touch on really 3 different projects that we've worked on over the last pretty much 10 years. And please put any questions you have in the chat. I'd be happy to answer them. Just to give you a little lay of the land, the Elizabeth River watershed is a 200 square mile watershed. It includes 4 cities, including Portsmouth, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and Chesapeake. It's considered a trap estuary, meaning that there's a lot of the residents' time with water retention. So like down here in the southern branch, VIMS estimates that the residents' time of a drop of water is about 20 days. So that's good and bad. Good for oyster restoration, but bad for contaminants or other things that can last in the river for a number of months or over a month to a couple months. So to give you a little background about our organization, the Elizabeth River Project was started by 4 citizens around a kitchen table in 1991. And our mission is to restore the Elizabeth River to the highest practical level of environmental quality, working in partnerships with government, business, and community partners. We don't go after companies. We actually work proactively with them. You can see this with our Riverstar business program. We have 139 facilities working with us to do restoration. Pam Boatwright, who I think is on this call, she heads up that program working with the industries. We have over 6,200 Riverstar homes. So those are homes that are working with us on either behavior change and or on the ground projects in their backyards or front yards. And then we have larger scale projects and working in partnership with the Navy and NOAA, EPA, along with a number of state organizations and then the 4 cities here in the watershed. So before we start down the road of looking at the projects we've worked on, lay a little foundation for sea level rise in general. So globally, you can see here it says until the 1880s and industrial age, the highest sea level rise was about 3 to 4 centimeters. And then after that, we really start seeing this sharp increase up to 14 centimeters by 2000. We have here in Hampton Roads, we have one of the best data sets that established pretty much in the Chesapeake Bay. Sewell's Point data set goes back to 1930. And so what we see here is that we've seen an average of about 1.5 feet of relative sea level rise over the last century. And you can see that's just increasing exponentially. So where does that leave us long term? So if you look here are all these different curves that have been developed about what sea level rise will look like from 2000 all the way out to 2100. The one that's typically used here in Hampton Roads is the NOAA Intermediate High. So that's the dotted line that you see here. And so that dotted line, what we see is that by 2100, we're looking at anywhere between 5 to 6 feet of relative sea level rise. And by 2050, we're looking at about 2 feet. So that's fairly significant. So what's causing this? It's not only sea level rising, but the region is also sinking. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is the area was pushed up by the glacial movement, and what happened is over time it's now contracting back after the glaciers melted about 20,000 years ago. And so we have this sinkage going on locally, along with some fairly significant groundwater extraction facilities at West Point and also Franklin. These are paper mills that are drawing water from the aquifer that also causes sinkage regionally.
Hey, Joe, just want to pause you real quick. If you can go back just a couple slides, we have a question from Natalie about the exponential sea level rise.
Oh, yep, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that one.
Okay.
Yeah, she just wants some clarification regarding the exponential nature of the sea level rise.
Well, you can see here that we're seeing this significant increase over time. So, if you look at from the 1930s in meters, it was at negative 0.30, and now we're at 0.15. So we're seeing, I'm not quite sure what the question relates to, but we're seeing this significant increase in sea level rise, and maybe it's not exponential, but it's a significant increase for the region. Not sure if that answers the question.
Yep, I think we're good to go.
Okay. So the other thing that Hampton Roads has going on is that really we've done significant amounts of filling through the region. So a lot of today's flooding was also where the creeks were formerly. So if you're familiar with Norfolk, for example, here are some major locations that you may know, like Harbor Park, where the tides play. That is actually on fill, used to be a wetland. The Nauticus, which some of you may know, again, if you can see where that was at, again on water, the MacArthur Mall. So what we see is that there's still conveyance through a lot of this rubble and material that was backfilled into the marshes here in Norfolk and Hampton Roads. So even though there may be a physical building or structure on it, the former stream bed is still a conveyance mechanism for water into many of these neighborhoods that now have significant amounts of flooding going on during high tide events and or major coastal storms. Sunny day flooding is also been increased. We see this is an area over by ODU, which again we see this flooding occurring during hot or full moons, and also northern winds. So a lot of times when we have wind blowing out of the north for a couple of days, we'll see the water stack up in the Elizabeth because of the way the mouth of the Elizabeth faces. It faces the north, so it pushes all the water into the river, and then it causes flooding. What we also have going on kind of on top of this is this local rainfall has intensified significantly over the last few years. So here, the black line, this is Norfolk International Airport. And you can see that the black line is the average for the region. And so what we see is that from 2015 up to here we said 2019, we see that almost all the months, or not all of them, but a lot of them are above the average. And we're seeing more intense rainfall events too, which then also causes flooding because our stormwater systems can't handle this volume that we're currently seeing. So what do we do? One of the projects which I wanted to talk about was Money Point, and give you an example of a project that we did. We didn't do it intentionally for sea level rise, but I think it's a great example of what can be done in other communities. And so here, this is Money Point in the southern branch of the Elizabeth River. Just to put you in perspective here. So the James River is up to the north as far up here above Craney Island. If you come all the way down to the Red Star in the southern branch, that is Money Point. And then you look over here where I have this arrow. So this is kind of the site, the site location I'm going to be talking about today. So what we ended up doing, I'll show you kind of like all the components of this, but Drew, can you see my pointer here?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So this area was formerly a creosote site, heavily contaminated with PAHs, polyaromatic hydrocarbons. And so we came in and developed the cleanup plan, but also worked with Kinder Morgan, one of our Riverstar businesses, to build a large 5-acre tidal wetland and upland buffer. So what we ended up doing is we ended up capping some contaminated material that you see out here in the river with sand, and then we backfilled it with sand, put a wetland sill out there, and then put plants on top of it to isolate the contaminants from the biota. But then in the uplands, this was all a big frag patch, huge patch of frag. So what we did is we basically pushed it all back into this large mound. And this mound's final elevation was about 14 feet NAVD 88 high. And then we created these little creeks that would actually flood into the marsh. And this is just like this is what the design kind of looked like. So we had this upland buffer. So out here is the river proper and the uplands that I just showed. So moving from the water to the uplands, we did a big sand cap to make sure that we were isolating the contaminants out in the river from fish and other biota. We created this oyster reef adjacent to that. Then we had that cap that I just showed you, which has this wetland sill. And then again, we pushed all this material up into this high berm and then planted it with native plants. So this is kind of what the site construction looked like. This was done in 2009, finished in 2010. And then you can see some elements here that I just wanted to point out is this wetland sill that was placed. We placed it higher than anticipated. A lot of this was due to this on the intercoastal waterway. So the boat wakes we were concerned about. And so the sill was higher than usual, and you can see it down here on the bottom right. We came back and started doing some monitoring at the site, and one of the things that we started to see is we had good success in recruitment of oysters. Initially, that was for like the first 3 years. Unfortunately, because of other factors, we have seen the population decline in the southern branch. So many of these oysters and the reef out in front aren't as productive as some other areas like the Lafayette, which I'm going to talk about later today. We did see an increase in finfish using these habitats. So like this juvenile speckled trout that I'm showing here. Before the project, we were documenting about 4 species. After the project, we increased that to 24 species. And this gives you a lay of the land, kind of like from a bird's perspective of what the final project looked like. So what does this all mean, like, for water quality? So there's been a number of other projects that I'm not going to highlight today, but one of the good things, so the Elizabeth River has some of the poorest water quality conditions in Chesapeake Bay. But the southern branch is notorious for having some of these poor conditions. But this is a recent report card that Elizabeth River Project put out this past year. And what we are seeing is improvements in a number of categories. One is reductions of tributyl 10, which is a very, it's a bottom paint, material used in bottom paint. And we're seeing significant decreases in those that have negative impacts on invertebrates. We're seeing improvements in chlorophyll concentrations. We're seeing reductions in PAHs throughout the southern branch, and fish cancer is also decreasing. So this site was also known for having about 40% prevalence of fish cancer, and that drops down to almost 5 to 6%, which is background level. We still are working on the bacterial contaminants. So again, bacteria are still a significant issue throughout the Elizabeth, and we are taking focus in the next 5 years to address that. So what does this all have to do with sea level rise? So we built the project, and we had this nice berm at 14 feet. It was like maybe 3 weeks later, we had the November nor'easter of 09 hit, which is Nor-Ida, if you remember. And so I remember I was sitting at home, I was like, oh my gosh, we just finished this project. One, we had all that goose fence up so that the geese wouldn't eat it. Really concerned how well the project would do, considering the state it was in. Well, when we went back, it actually held up extremely well. The water got so high that most of the material that was pushed into the site went above the goose fencing. There was a rack line up on the berm, not to the top of the berm, but to the mid part of the berm. And so what we saw is that there was a significant reduction, or there was a reduction from flooding at Money Point because this berm functioned so well. And so what happened is that the berm prevented the northern face of the river from back flooding into a lot of the areas at Money Point, because this berm was set at 14 feet, and it prevented onshore flooding that would have happened with the storm surge. And this was a pretty, this storm in general was one of the largest storms to hit. Looking at the tidal gauge at Money Point, there's actually a tidal gauge down there. The Nor-Ida sat over us for about 70 hours and just dumped rain and a significant amount of tidal flooding associated with this storm. It was one of the highest recorded levels of flooding in the Chesapeake Bay at this particular station. Compared to Irene or Isabel, Isabel was about 12 hours and Irene was 20. So this was a significant event, and it held up very well. So I wanted to show you kind of like, so I've showed you some photos, but this is what it looks like now. And Drew, just tell me if you're seeing the video. Is it working?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so this is Money Point now, and we've been working with BIMS and Norfolk State to look at some photosynthesis in these plants compared to freshwater, contaminated and non-contaminated areas. So this gives you an idea of what it looks like out there. I did want to point some things out to everybody. So this is the marsh that I was talking about. Some things that we are seeing at the site. If you look up here at the top right-hand corner, so you can see that the wetland sill, we are seeing a little bit of sinkage there, but also we're losing a little bit of that marsh, and a lot of that was a lower marsh that was built there. So again, that may be a result of slight sea level rise, because we're seeing that plants are very sensitive to the elevations in which they grow here, Spartina alterniflora. So, eventually this entire site will, at least all Spartina alterniflora site, will be drowned out. However, as you can see to the right, we've got this nice vegetative buffer. So that's the buffer that we put in with native trees, and that will allow for a migration of this marsh up that bank that we created with the berm. And so out in front of the sill that you see here, that's where we had the oyster reef and also the sand cap that we had in place to isolate the contaminants. All right, and with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I was going to pass this back over to Drew. Drew, do you have a, can you do a, can you do the poll for us?
Yeah, the poll. All right, so you want to do the first one on sea level rise?
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. Let's launch it. Uh-oh.
We got a quick poll for you guys here. See how much you were paying attention on a Monday morning.
I'm getting an error message here, Joe.
Not working?
It's not working. This is
That's all right. I'll continue on, and if it happens to start working,
okay, yeah.
we'll test everyone's test everyone at the end if you can get it working. If not, then we can just address questions.
Great.
All right. So moving right along. Let's see. Oh. Sorry, everybody. All right. My screen froze up there. Hold on. Didn't like that video. Drew, can you see my screen?
No,
No?
I can't. I don't see it right now.
Huh. Okay. Hold on.
I see your screen. I see your Outlook.
All right, hold on. Like that.
There we go.
All right, here we go. All right, does that look good now?
Yes.
All right, so talking a little bit more about resiliency and also the use of oysters and specifically looking at some projects that we did here on the Lafayette River. So, and also the Eastern Branch. So we've been working to restore oysters down here in the Elizabeth River pretty much for the last 10 years. And one of the two tributaries we worked in was the Lafayette River, which in 2018 was completely restored for oyster habitat. And then this past year, in 2020, we accomplished the Eastern Branch. And again, this was, and I should mention even Money Point. Money Point was the result of significant amounts of partners, particularly the industries in the upland, the state and EPA, state and also EPA, and also funding from a variety of different sources, including National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, a number of state funding, the Living River Restoration Trust. And so, you know, the key thing here is that we had so many partners participating that, you know, our organization alone couldn't have accomplished Money Point by ourselves and or this oyster restoration work on the Lafayette and the Eastern Branch. So what we ended up, what makes a good place for oysters? Well, one is hard bottom and it's not mud, that we have significant oysters on a habitat or you know, at the site, adjacent to marsh or green shoreline. So again, this is to help prevent ongoing erosion to the site. We use a lot of these reefs to help reduce erosion because what we are continuously seeing is that there's a there's erosion going on at the edge of the marsh that then pushes the water line closer to structures and homes. So oyster reefs can help to reduce that ongoing erosion. We need salty conditions, and it's not flashy, meaning that it doesn't go from 28 parts per thousand to 2, which there are some areas that happens. We try to keep reefs within a mile of one another so that we continuously have seeding from one reef to another. The adjacent landowners are interested. That can be a big one. If you don't have landowners interested, you got a hard uphill battle. And then can you get equipment to the site? So again, this is just an example of the partners that we worked with in the Lafayette to put projects in. Again, Hampton Roads Sanitation District, they used spent concrete when they were building pump stations to build these oyster structures that they then donated to us, and we put them in to reduce ongoing erosion at a site in the Eastern Branch. NOAA, NIFWIF, and CBF, who CBF was a partner in seeding our reefs, and NIFWIF and NOAA in funding them. VMRC, Virginia Marine Resources Commission, took the initiative and restored a significant amount of the reefs in the Eastern Branch in 2020. And then community volunteers that both CBF, ourselves, and other organizations like Lafayette Wetlands Partnership would bring out to put in and seed these oyster reefs and or build these oyster reefs. So kind of like some innovations that I think are kind of nice takeaways for these designs is that one is that we try, at least you can't do this in Maryland, but you can do it in Virginia, but we have intertidal reefs. So we try to make about a quarter of our reefs intertidal and the rest of them subtidal. And what that allows us to do is that there's constant seeding from the subtidal to the intertidal, but the intertidal has a potential of freezing in the wintertime. So a lot of times you'll have high mortality there. But the nice thing about the intertidal ones is that you can then put it right up adjacent to the marsh to reduce ongoing erosion at that site. And we've also started using oyster castles down in the bottom left. So again, these are used to elevate the site and then backfill with sand behind them to get the correct elevation for the marsh. And then also we've been looking at placing these reefs in like a windrow. So here you can see stripes are just lines to it. So it's 12 inches high of shell or crushed concrete that are put on the bottom, and they're put into these rows that have gaps in between them that are just native sediments underneath, between them. This provides habitat complexity for finfish, but at the same time allows oysters to grow. And we know that oysters, there's been a number of papers that say that oysters set in the right conditions can keep up with sea level rise. So again, this is a nice technique to protect shorelines that one can use. So kind of moving into this idea of both gray and green infrastructure, there's some things that we use to build these reefs. One is oyster shell, but it's extremely expensive to come by. This is a little bit older, $68 a cubic yard. Now it's out about $80 a cubic yard. But we've been looking at crushed concrete, which is a reused material locally that we can use. It's a lot cheaper, about $20 a cubic yard. Whelk shell from Eastern Shore we've used. That's about $40 a cubic yard. And then granite, which again is about $50, a lot more expensive. And there's actually been quite a bit of data to show that crushed concrete does just as well as oyster shell. So we have been looking at this kind of gray, I call it gray infrastructure, using crushed concrete as an alternative material for building a number of these reefs. And this idea of integrating both green and gray infrastructure for protecting structures and also addressing sea level rise is not a new one. This was published initially in 2015 about using this hybrid approach of both gray and green infrastructure. So we've been using this in a lot of our projects to take a hybrid approach of using both gray infrastructure integrated with green infrastructure. And some of these gray infrastructure elements are these oyster castles that I mentioned earlier. We've worked with these grow tiles by Grow Oyster. The idea of using gabion, so like using chicken wire and enclosing shell in them and putting them at the toe of the marsh so that it doesn't erode away, that's been pretty effective. We're working on a
Hi there.
project.
My organization is hosting a
Hello?
You can keep going, Joe.
Okay. We've been working with Virginia Institute of Marine Science to look at these ghost pots that are out. They smash them, dip them in concrete. We're going to see how well those perform. And then we also have these oyster bars that you see down here. And this was from Sandbar Products in North Carolina. And then with CBF, we've used these oyster reef balls. So again, not exactly, probably a mixture, a little bit here of green, whatever we want to call green and gray infrastructure, but this grayish infrastructure can be used in concert with the green. And we've relied mostly on these oyster castles. You can build these, from anywhere from 2 high to 7 to 8 high. You can have different designs. So you have what we call diamond face, where the point's pointing out to reduce the wave action that comes in. Straight face, where it's just the straight face of it facing the waterway, and then the zigzag design, which we don't really use anymore. We usually use that diamond face on our marshes. And here's an example we did at Nitty Mill Creek on the Lafayette River a few years ago. So significant amounts of ongoing erosion. You can see it here where the arrows pointing to it. The arrows are pointing to it. It was adjacent to a reef that we did with Chesapeake Bay Foundation, but we still had the black needle rush that was being eroded away. So we came out, and with volunteers, we then placed these castles in front of the marsh. And we also have a Michael Berg here on the right. He actually has been using waste concrete to build these oyster bergs. So we integrated some local innovation into the project where we used some of his products here. And then you can see we backfilled it with sand and planted it. This is less than a year out after the project was completed. We've got the marsh starting to take off now. It's extremely lush marsh there, along with significant recruitment of oysters on these castles. So there are co-benefits with this, right? So, we build these projects a lot of times to meet a reduction in nitrogen, phosphorus, or even to address sea level rise, but a lot of times the critters can be overlooked. At a lot of these sites, we're seeing not only oyster recruitment, but rib mussel recruitment. Adjacent to the reefs I talked about, we're now picking up seahorses, and minks are using these. We're seeing a significant increase in minks throughout the watershed, which is pretty cool. Wading birds are using these habitats for feeding. A lot of that harder structure is attracting black sea bass. And then commercial recreation on these reefs have also increased. So we're seeing that puppy drum and speckled trout are using these reefs for feeding, and it attracts anglers. And so it also gets people bought into the concept of using these types of mechanisms to address sea level rise. And in the Lafayette, a lot of the work we did had already shown significant results, where we've actually got the Lafayette to a C, and now it's holding its own at a C. We're seeing, again, that drop in TBT that we once had. Again, we are still combating the bacteria issue, just like we were in the Southern Branch. So the last project I wanted to talk about is one that we're currently underway with the Ryan Resilience Lab. This project has been ongoing for about 2 years. We were in Portsmouth, Virginia, and we were outgrowing our facility, and we started looking around, where would our next move be for our staff and also for Elizabeth River project. And so we looked around, and we wanted something close to the water, but that something that would be big enough that we could have our staff work out of. Well, we started talking to the city of Norfolk, and this idea that the city said is that the city now has one of the most stringent zoning and ordinances in the U.S., which requires this coastal resilience overlay using a numbering system to try for new and redevelopment. And what they were hearing from builders is like, you're asking us to do all this stuff, but can you show us examples and how it's going to be properly done? So the city said, you know, it would be great if you're looking for an office at the same time, if we had a facility that you could showcase some of these things that builders can do to build more resilient structures. And so this then started us down this road of looking at, can we build a facility that then showcases these elements, and then, you know, a homeowner or a developer could come in and say, okay, how do I do this? What are the products that could be used? So this is, you know, the facility is to be showcase real life materials that anyone can use or could find locally or pretty locally at the site. And so, and also showcasing some of our living shoreline cost share work that we can do with homeowners and our BMPs that we can work with homeowners on. So we bought this property on Colley Avenue, and we're now in final design of this facility that you see here, which is the Ryan Resilience Lab. We're also going to work on integrating art into it. So if you look kind of like where everyone's sitting on this photograph, if you look to the right, that is the average temperature in the city of Norfolk from 1874 to 2018. And so the idea is that you can see how much warmer Norfolk is becoming over time. And so again, integrating art with science is something that we really want to make sure this facility showcases. So what was it site before? Here's the site on the left. The site was a former boat facility. It's actually a brownfield site. So what we're doing is we're taking a brownfield site to make it into a greenfield site. There was these boats. We found underground storage tanks of gas and diesel that had leaked into the site. Those have been removed. The contaminated soil is removed. And it currently has a bulkhead in place that you can see here, kind of like in front on the river and the brown, and a dilapidated pier that you see. So all that will be removed and the living shoreline put in place. And so this is kind of the concept behind the building that we're working on, is that the bulkhead would be removed. We plant this marsh, and then on top of that, we would put this floating dock that can move up and down with sea level rise and or storms that it doesn't become overtopped. We're working with VIMS right now, Virginia Institute of Marine Science, and ODU. So this whole facility is to be used to research sea level rise. So we have a number of graduate students already working on the site from ODU. VIMS is put in a continuous monitoring station at the site, so you can have real-time water quality data that you can go onto your computer right now and look at what the DO or the chlorophyll levels are at the site. So again, this is to do more education, or not education of children, but focused really on academics and doing academic research to look at and evaluate sea level rise. We're also looking at, and there's a potential that it's not for sure, but we're looking at showcasing these secondary structures of these amphibious storage buildings that you see up in the top center. So again, both dry proofing and also floating structures. We want to attract folks also for recreation, to get them on the river. So we have a kayak put in, and a marsh with the buffer working its way up from the edge of water behind the facility. So we're planning for this facility to have a lifespan about 30 to 50 years, and knowing that the site would have to be abandoned over time. With sea level rise, there's a lot of locations in Hampton Roads and the surrounding community that this is going to happen. You know, the sea level rise is going to impact a lot of these facilities and homes where we're going to have to pull back from the edge of water. And so this facility, we're planning for about a 50-year lifespan based off of the current resilience flooding maps that I showed you, our curves that I showed you earlier. So we're planning for that, and once the facility has lived its life out, it would then become green space back to the public. So through all this kind of lessons learned, something that, you know, all these projects I mentioned have significant amounts of partners and funding associated with it, and I guess some lessons learned that we at ERP have learned is that continuously work to build trust throughout the community. You know, the more folks trust you, the more you're going to get done. For example, at Money Point, That project was evaluated for a very large project for the federal government, 25 years ago, but the landowners wouldn't allow the folks onto their land to help do a remediation there. But we came in, built trust for about 2 years with the landowners, and we were able to push that project forward based off of that, using trust and our community support. So again, that's a key one. Your stakeholders and partners are your most important asset in urban restoration, so you need to empower them. So, again, using all the stakeholders and partners, I think both of these projects showcase that, and developing a community plan. So we have a watershed action plan that we're continuing, that we're actually in the midst of right now, to come out with specific projects that the community will support and get public input into, and then celebrate the successes in the community and also acknowledge your mistakes. And I think that's a big one. We learned throughout, especially during that oyster work, what we made some mistakes, and we learned what to do and what not to do, and then try not to make that mistake again. And then monitoring, again, it doesn't have to be real detailed monitoring, but at least to show people that the money that's being spent on all these projects are resulting in some tangible result is important. And the community, are you making a difference or not? I did have I did have a video. I was moving on to, it was pretty much the end of my presentation there, but I did have a video that I was going to try to share and see if this works. So let me stop sharing. All right, let's see. Hopefully this will work. Drew, I'm having trouble with that video again. I'm sorry.
Well, maybe while you're working on getting the video up, does anyone have any questions they want to ask Joe?
Drew, should we just unmute to ask? This is Tali.
Yes, go for
Okay, and sorry for my previous interruption.
it. You're fine.
Cal emergency. I guess I just had a question about that. The facility at the end, I mean, it looks like totally remarkable, but a 30-year time frame for an entire building. I mean, I didn't hear like what it's going to cost and all that kind of stuff. Even 30 to 50 years seems not like that big, like a huge amount of time. Is that facility like so necessary for that type of research that you want to put it there, as opposed to just converting that whole space into a natural area that will flood and and not be something that you're building for use for what seems like not a long amount of time for an entire research facility?
Good question. So typical buildings have about a 50-year time frame associated with them. So that is fairly that's a fairly accurate time frame for a building. The key is here is that it's not only for research, but it's also to help help showcase developers and homeowners what they can do here in Hampton Roads to be more resilient at their homes and businesses. So living here in Hampton Roads, the face of Hampton Roads is going to change significantly over time. There's not a lot of resources or examples of how you do that. And so this building is not only for research, but also to be a model to the community of what one can do to combat or at least learn to live with water down here.
Any other questions for Joe? You can, I have a few, but I want to open it up to everyone. Feel free to unmute yourself, or you can drop a question in the chat. So going back to your Money Point project, Joe, why was that site selected originally? And one of the technical terms that you mentioned was frag. I was hoping that you might be able to explain what that is and why Money Point was selected.
So Money Point was selected because it had been originally the Corps of Engineers did a evaluation of the Elizabeth River in the late 90s, and they identified all these hot spots for contamination for PAHs. PAHs are, it's material that you see like on a telephone pole. It's a tar material. So the Elizabeth River had been used to treat pine with this material. And before the Clean Water Act was overboard into the river. So we knew that there were these hot spots in the river where we saw high rates of cancer in fish. So the Corps had done this evaluation. We knew that was a hot spot. And so we decided that that was a project that we wanted to take on as a community. And so we focused our efforts down there and pulled together resources to make it happen. And we knew that it wasn't a Superfund site, which is actually a good thing. It didn't get caught up in the bureaucracy of, a Superfund program. A lot of those sites sit in there for 20 and 30 years and have very little progress. So we were able to do this working with the community partners. From start to finish, it was less than 7 years to do the design, get community buy-in, do the design, and then build the project. And so, originally it was chosen just because it had been identified in that plan. And I think the other thing, and I touched on it in the lessons learned, is you had willing partners. Because we built that trust with the landowners, they were all for helping with the remediation. And also, Kinder Morgan gave us 5 to 7 acres of frag, which is the invasive reed that I mentioned. They gave that to us to allow us to do this shoreline work in concert with the cleanup. So, it kind of, you had the players at the table that were interested in participating, and then you had quite a bit of data showing from the Corps of the significant impacts that we had down there at Money Point. Oh, thanks. Mary just showed the port. Thanks, Mary. Mary just in the chat put the portal for the ongoing water quality monitoring that Virginia Institute of Marine Science is set up at the Riot and Resilience Lab. So if you'd like to check out some of that water quality data. Unfortunately, we did see 2 weeks ago, I think. 2 weeks ago, we saw a drop. We have algal blooms going on right now throughout the lower Chesapeake Bay. We had a couple cloudy days in which we had a massive die-off of the algae, and then that resulted in a drop in DO and some fish kills here. So, but you can check out the live data there in the chat.
This is Tally. I have one more.
Go ahead, Tally.
Time. I was just wondering, with all this work that you're doing, sort of, and I assume there's like outreach and sharing with the people there. Have you received, like, since these projects, any like uptick or questions from people about what they can do sort of on their own property, or like how has this been influencing like decision making or behavior changes or anything like that in the community?
That's a great question. And I didn't even touch on the program that we have. Well, I mean, I mentioned it, but the River Star Homes program that I mentioned. So what we have a program called River Star Homes, and what we do is it's a program which we get people in the door first to make behavior changes, like pick up after your pet, don't put grease down the sink. So that's kind of like how you get them through. And then we give them a flag that they put out front that then shows that they're a member, and then their neighbor, ask about it, and they become a River Star home. But that's kind of like the entrance for a River Star home applicant. But then once we got them kind of bought into the program, we actually help install BMPs on their property. So we do living shoreline projects, we do buffers, we do rain barrels, and we also do rain gardens. And so we have a contract with the city of Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and Chesapeake, an annual contract that allows us to cost share with homeowners. So the homeowners that say if there's like a living shoreline project they wanted to do in their backyard, we'll come to their house, we'll design it for them, we'll do the permitting, and then if it costs, let's just say it costs $10,000, we can cost share up to $4,000. So they, the city throws in $4,000, and we throw the homeowner throws in $6,000, and then we can build it for a much cheaper cost than if they were taking the burden on themselves. So again, those are projects, and we can and conservation landscaping. We also help homeowners do plant selections for their homes. So that whole program is focused on what a residents can do at their own home. And then Pam's program, the River Star Business Program, Pam goes out and goes to businesses and industries, goes on site, does evaluations, does a write-up of what they can do at their site. And if they have a big project which potentially could be done at their facility, then we can actually start looking for grant opportunities to help implement cost share with business to implement that project. Here's a question here. Are homeowners responsible for maintenance on River Star BMPs? Yes, yes, they are. One thing, you guys have some great questions to lead into other things. We have a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant right now, which so what happens is these BMPs, in order to recertify them for the Bay model, because what happens is a lot of these localities are using these BMPs to take reductions for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reduction for the requirements for their reduction for the TMDL. We have to recertify them every certain number of years, and it depends on the BMP and when it gets recertified. But we have a grant from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation right now. It's going to be finishing up here. I think the recertification work will be finishing up in about a month. So what that will do is that we have to go back out to those sites, make sure the BMP is in place and it's still functioning, and then we recertify it that way, and we develop the whole program for that we'll be sharing with NIFWIP, and also sharing it with other organizations of how you recertify these residential BMPs. We do find that some of them aren't maintained as well as others, so some are easy and some are hard. The biggest one is that frag coming into some of these living shoreline projects. I'd say that's one of our bigger ones. And then for some of our conservation landscaping, what we're finding is there is some mortality and or improper mowing. So it's not perfect, but it is definitely something that we're learning from. But yes, the homeowners signed a document saying that they're going to maintain the BMP.
So thanks to Keith Ward, our National Wildlife Federation's Zoom whiz, he helped launch the first poll here. So going back to early on in the presentation, talking about sea level rise, question of how many feet sea level has risen over the last century. Drop in your response, and we'll end it in just a few seconds here. While that's going on, Joe, another question. So one of the parts of the Money Point project I found most intriguing was how it wasn't designed with sea level rise in mind. It was more for water quality improvement and wildlife habitat, I think, too. So knowing if you were to look back, go back to what 2008 or 2009 when you're planning the project, what would you have done differently, if anything, if you also, in addition to water quality and wildlife habitat, also had sea level rise in mind?
That's a good question. You know, might have built the berm a little higher. I don't, I mean, that's City of Norfolk just is finishing a large project through this major HUD funding, which is the Ohio Creek project that some of you may be familiar with. They're taking a similar approach with a berm that they're building a berm down in front of the residents' homes. But it's going to function a very similar way without a bunch of trees like we had in ours. But maybe a little bit higher. I will tell you, ongoing maintenance of frag is, I mean, it's definitely a something that one has to consider because there's still frag behind it. We continuously have to control for it. So I'd say, maintenance is definitely something. The marsh itself doesn't have a lot of maintenance, but the upland has a little bit more maintenance because of the frag. So have a maintenance plan in hand when you do projects like these. And also funding, so the other part is we're finding that, some of these BMPs that aren't functioning well, this goes back to the question before. I think as a, if this is not sea level rise focus, but just say BMPs in general, you have to have a maintenance plan or a maintenance fund in order to address projects that are either marginally effective or failing.
Great. I'm gonna toss it to Keith to end the poll so that we can see the results, and Joe can end all of our suspense by reminding us of the answer.
So the answer is 1.5 feet. So the majority of you guys got it right. You guys are quick today on a Monday. Folks have any other questions or anything else I can address?
I'm trying to see here if we can also do, we have a second poll question here. Here it is. How high was the berm? Joe mentioned they wish maybe they're a little bit higher, but how high did they do it? We'll give a few more seconds here and then we'll go ahead and end it. All right, Keith, yeah, if you can go ahead and end the poll, we can see what the group thinks. Joe, you want to enlighten us?
14 feet.
All right. Interesting. Great. Well, any other one? We have a few minutes left here, but I have nothing against giving you guys a few extra minutes to add to your break before we begin our next presentation at 10:50. But before I release you for a little bit, anyone else have any other questions for Joe? All right. Well, thank you, Joe. Really appreciate your time and insight, and obviously, of course, all of your amazing work down there in the Hampton Roads region. I think there's certainly a lot for us to learn, particularly given where you are in the watershed and how climate change really is, I imagine, at top of mind because you're seeing it all, the effects of it all the time down there. So we're going to begin our next presentation at 10:50. So stay tuned for that. Get your coffee, and we'll see you at 10:50 with our next presenters. Holly Gallagher and Natalie Cohen from the National Wildlife Federation. So we'll see you in a few minutes. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. And look at our next presenter. So I am excited to introduce our next presenters, Holly Gallagher and Natalie Cohen from the National Wildlife Federation. Holly is the Senior Manager of Education and Community Conservation at NWF. She just celebrated her 5th anniversary, where she has led education and community conservation initiatives across the Mid-Atlantic region. But it's an exciting time for Holly because this might be the last time she's introduced with that title, as she is recently is set to become NWF's new Mid-Atlantic Director of Conservation Partnerships. So really excited to have Holly with us. And also, apparently it's anniversary season, as Natalie has just celebrated her 2nd anniversary with NWF and is a key player in growing NWF's education and conservation programs. Really excited to hear from both Holly and Natalie on about the many climate change connections to their work restoring schoolyard habitats and vacant urban lots. So with that, take it away, Holly and Natalie.
Thank you so much, Drew, and good morning, everyone. Glad to have you with us. I am going to share my screen. Nope. You can see my very crowded background. Can you see my screen, Drew?
We can see it. I think you just need to put it into the slideshow mode.
Great. Okay, so you see the correct full screen?
Yep.
Perfect. You think I would be a pro by now? We're working on it. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to be talking today about enhancing community resiliency through urban wildlife habitat corridors, focusing specifically on our work in Baltimore, Maryland, and touching a little bit on our work in Philadelphia related to schoolyard habitats and also vacant lot restoration. And to kick us off, I'm going to turn it over to Natalie.
Thanks, Holly. Good morning, everyone. So welcome back from your break. And before we launch into our presentation, I wanted to give us an opportunity to move around a little bit. So if you'd like, and if you're able to, please stand up. And I'm gonna go ahead and stand up myself. And once you're standing, you want to close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, and really press your feet into the floor. And imagine, and you can wiggle your toes and spread them out as far as you can, and really imagine your feet to be tree roots, anchoring yourself to the ground and growing deep, deep underground and really supporting your entire being. So once you are settled in standing, take a few deep breaths. And on an inhale, you're going to extend your arms overhead, grow strong like a mighty oak. So imagine that your arms are your tree branches, and you can go ahead and sway your arms back and forth, move your spine, your heartwood of your trees, what allows you to bend with the seasons and the wind. And so you just want to go ahead and stretch your arms a little more. Take a nice final deep breath, lower your arms back down, and find a seat. And thank you for that opportunity.
And we're going to move into the polls, Drew, if you want to launch.
Yes. And so before we launch into our presentation, we would love to know who is in the room with us today. So please answer the following question. Which of the following best describes your role or your organization's role in this work? A program or project manager, conservation or restoration practitioner, a scientist, environmental educator, communications and marketing, advocacy and campaigns, community organizing, funder or fundraising efforts, or other.
And the second one, yeah, it should be conservation or restoration practitioner. It says researcher twice, so sorry for the confusion.
Yeah. Okay.
My bad.
Okay, Drew.
That's all right. Okay, we still have a few people taking the poll. But let's see, it looks like communications and marketing is going to be our largest audience today. Oh, and environmental educators. Awesome. Glad to have everyone in the room. Let's see, followed by conservation and restoration practitioners, program project managers, a few community organizers. Love to have you all here, and a funder. So that's great. Thank you all for being here. Let's go on to the second poll. Drew. Okay, so if you or your organization are involved with on-the-ground projects or education and outreach efforts, what types of locations do you typically work at? And you can select multiple for this. Early childhood centers, K through 12 schools, higher ed, community centers, vacant lots or public green spaces, religious institutions, or privately owned property? Okay, so it's looking like a lot of folks working in public parks and public green spaces, which is so crucial to our work. So love to see that. K through 12, higher ed, privately owned property. I would love to learn more about those that work on privately owned property. That's not typically stuff that we do at NWF. Let's see. And vacant lots we'll be touching on today. And no early childhood centers. That's okay. All right. Cool. So I guess we can stop sharing those polls. Holly, if you'd like to get your screen back up.
Yep, there you go.
Thank you. Okay, so getting to know each other. Zoom can be so impersonal sometimes. So we would really love to foster and curate a room of, well, we're all like-minded folks, I'm sure, but we really want to, I guess, humanize this process a little. So take a minute to internally to reflect about one place in nature that has had a formative or lasting impact on you. This could be a place from your childhood, somewhere, you know, growing up, or something, a more recent experience in nature that has really stayed with you. And for folks that are willing to share, please enter it into the chat. And then if folks would also love to unmute themselves, we could take a couple people, a couple personal stories we would love to hear. And I see stuff popping into the chat, so let's see. A small barrier island off the coast of South Carolina where I worked on a sea turtle nesting project, cool. Small stream by my childhood home, the Smoky Mountains, the Lane Cove River in Sydney, Australia. I grew up right by it. Cool, Katie. The C&O Canal, doing backpacking trips. Woods and a rail trail and a riparian corridor behind my childhood home, Acadia, Cleveland Metro Parks. Awesome. My mom used to teach a science camp out of her church. Shout out to UUC. Meredith, I used to work at Amazing Grace Lutheran Church, so I'm very familiar with TUUC. I'm happy that you're in the room today with us. Summer camp, Baja. Okay, lots of amazing places. Would anyone like to unmute themselves and just give a short little anecdotal story of your fond memories of nature? And if not, we can just keep moving. All right, let's keep moving. Next slide, please, Holly. So again, I'm Natalie Cohen with the National Wildlife Federation. And for over 80 years, the NWF has been the United States' largest conservation and education organization. Our mission is to unite all Americans to ensure that wildlife thrives in a rapidly changing world. And Holly and I, and a lot of folks in our Mid-Atlantic Regional Center focus on the coexistence of wildlife and humans, especially in urban environments. And NWF is truly, we are a large organization. We have 7 regional centers throughout the country. Our headquarters is based in Reston, Virginia, and we also have the National Advocacy Center in DC. Our Mid-Atlantic Regional Center is based in Annapolis, Maryland, though I have not been to our office in some time due to COVID. And NWF truly works as a federation. So we have 52 state and territory affiliates throughout the country. And in Maryland, our affiliate is the National Aquarium in Baltimore. What drives our work? Research has shown that the Mid-Atlantic is getting hotter and wetter as a result of climate change, and communities with a significant amount of impervious surfaces like roads, sidewalks, and rooftops, and few trees or other vegetation are particularly vulnerable to extreme heat and flooding. Some parts of Baltimore can be as much as 20 degrees hotter than other neighborhoods, and that is a trend that is not only unique to Baltimore, but really experienced in most urban centers throughout the world. So we have this photo here, is from 2018. It was the flood that wiped out Old Ellicott City for a second time. This is in West Baltimore along Frederick Avenue inside the Beltway. And you can see that this main corridor that leads east to west in Baltimore was flooded with over 7 feet of water. And a lot of houses experienced their basements flooding, sewage overflows, and a lot of other traumatizing impacts from that storm. And more recently, we can think of Hurricane Ida, which started in the tropics and somehow made its way up the entire East Coast over several days. And Annapolis had, crazy tornadoes, and luckily everyone in our office was safe and well. Thank goodness. But so we're really motivated by climate change and creating climate resilient communities. Here we have a map of Baltimore showing the urban heat island effect. So you can see, obviously, the dark red is the hottest neighborhoods, or hottest parts of Baltimore, and our dark blue are going to be the lightest or the coolest. You can see that the hottest neighborhoods in Baltimore are on the east side along the Monument Street corridor specifically, and then you can easily pick out our urban forests. We have Leakin Park in the west, Silburn Arboretum, Roland Park, kind of surrounding the super metro built environment. And urban heat island is directly correlated with lack of tree canopy and green space. So we're not only in a climate crisis, but we're also in a biodiversity crisis. In 2019, the United Nations report found that 1 million plant and animal species are at risk for imminent extinction due to human activity. Insects, including pollinators like butterflies, bees, and birds, are particularly vulnerable. Other studies have suggested that as many as 40% of insect species may be endangered over the next several decades, which will have a dramatic effect on our entire ecosystem. One iconic example of a species under threat is the monarch butterfly, which has seen a population decline of almost 90% over the past 20 years. Biodiversity loss is even more evident in cities and urban areas where increased development has precipitated significant loss of native habitat. Other contributing factors to biodiversity loss include land use changes, pollution, invasive species, and of course, our rapidly changing climate. And given the fact that we work primarily in urban environments, we have to acknowledge and understand that not all neighborhoods are equally impacted by climate change. And this is due primarily to the racist housing policy known as redlining that deemed particular neighborhoods unworthy of investment and lending based on racial discrimination, and it has shaped modern day American cities like Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Detroit. Redlining made it difficult for individuals to purchase homes and to borrow against the value of their homes. It affected entire neighborhoods, reducing owner occupancy, lowering property values, decreasing housing quality, and increasing racial segregation. Historically redlined neighborhoods, oh, just one second, Holly, could you go back one more? Thank you. Historically redlined neighborhoods. So here we have a map of redlined Baltimore. And redlining really became a practice in Baltimore. It was one of the first redlined cities. And so historically redlined communities have direct correlations with high asthma rates, low urban tree canopy, high vacant lot and house density, gun violence, and overall poverty indicators. So we can see that though redlining became illegal in the 60s, it is having a really long lasting impact on Baltimore and communities across the country. And Holly, I will pass it over to you now.
Great, thank you for that introduction. So NWF, our overarching goal is to support a community's resiliency to climate change impacts that Natalie talked about. So we are trying to create or restore wildlife habitat, in particular creating networks or corridors through urban environments like Baltimore that will help increase biodiversity and reduce urban heat island. We're also trying to improve water quality and stormwater management to mitigate nuisance flooding. We're increasing equitable access to green space by investing in priority communities like Natalie talked about. And we are fostering long-term relationships with local partners to ensure continued stewardship of those spaces and make sure that we're doing this work in an authentic and inclusive way. So we are always looking to involve local partners. We're considering working directly with communities on their priorities. And we are working with folks to engage in hands-on activities. So whenever possible, doing plantings, cleanups, and incorporating the educational aspect as well with community members, with teachers, and with students. So these are some examples of projects that we work on, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them shortly. But we are creating wildlife corridors specifically for pollinators. So thinking about how can we increase the population of birds, bees, butterflies, other insects in Baltimore and other urban spaces in order to address impacts from climate change like flooding and heat, but also provide community benefits like mental and physical health or aesthetic benefits to a community. So NWF works in schools, we work in vacant lots, and we're not going to talk today about our work with places of worship, but we do have a program called Sacred Grounds that work with religious institutions. And we're going to talk today specifically about schools and vacant lots, but we do also work on other community sites as well. And in general, our projects aim to integrate environmental education, community engagement, and climate smart conservation principles. And we range in scale of working at one site to scaling up and working on a network of 50 different sites, which we'll tell you about today, a project in Philadelphia. But our goal is really always to develop something that is innovative and can be scaled up either within our region or nationally. So our history in Baltimore, we began working on the ground in about 2012, 2013, and that was largely around our effort to work with partners to get the city certified as a National Wildlife Federation community wildlife habitat. So thinking about building these wildlife habitats across the entire city and collectively getting certification for that. We achieved that in 2018. It was certified as the largest community wildlife habitat in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And we did that in partnership with our affiliate, the National Aquarium. This is the result of years-long collaboration with NWF, the National Aquarium, and a lot of other partners on the ground in Baltimore. And since then, we're continuing to grow our investment in the city. We've worked in neighborhoods, including Reservoir Hill, McElderry Park, more recently in Gwynns Falls and Druid Heights as well. And this is a logo that we had developed that incorporates our work with the Orioles. There's the Oriole bird, and then the other bird there is intended to be a raven. So we heart Baltimore. Since 1996, National Wildlife Federation has helped thousands of schools across the country create schoolyard habitats in order to restore native habitat, provide access to nature, and create outdoor classrooms for learning, which, as we know, is even more critical now in our current situation with COVID and the need for being outdoors. In Baltimore, we've also placed a heavy emphasis on water quality improvements and climate resiliency. So we're thinking not only about installing native plants, pollinator gardens, but also rain gardens and other stormwater best management practices as well. And I want to talk specifically about two projects that we have. So the first was at Green Street Academy, which was a project funded by NIFWF through their Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund. That was a 2-year project that we did from 2016 to 2018. Our partners, primary partners, were Blue Water Baltimore, Biohabitats, and also Green Street Academy, the school themselves, and they're located in West Baltimore. We worked with them to install a over 5,000 square foot pollinator meadow, which you can see the students putting in on the left there in that image. We also put in a rain garden to capture runoff from the parking lot, which is the image on the right. And then a unique bio retention bench to capture runoff from the roof and also provide seating that could be a sort of outdoor classroom. So that is the image there in the center. The school is maintaining it themselves with some support from the project partners. They do have a dedicated farm manager and an agricultural program for students. So they are unique in having a lot of the skills to be able to do that and being able to now incorporate these features into their programming. And like I mentioned, students did help to plant the meadow. It was a very long, strenuous day. We had a lot of actually Chesapeake Conservation Corps members out there as well, because if you can't tell from the photo, ground was quite impacted and it was compacted, and it was very it was difficult. And then the intention here was really to use Green Street as a demonstration site for other schools. So since then, we've been able to bring teachers from other schools in, as well as other professionals, government officials. We've held multiple gatherings, including for the Maryland Project Green Classrooms Leadership Committee. So trying to make this a model for how to incorporate stormwater best management practices on school grounds that's also tied to student education. And I want to share some pictures. So the picture you saw on the previous slide was right after it was installed. This is now from September 2019. So 4 months later, this is what the bioretention bench was looking like. And then this is the rain garden. This is from June 2020. So this is 1 year after it was installed. And again, the school and I believe Blue Water has also been out helping them to maintain this.
Just a quick question about this, Holly, from Meredith. Did you plant the plants directly in the ground, or was there additional compost and soil brought in?
You know what? So you're talking about the pollinator meadow?
Yes.
For the meadow, we did not bring any. That day, we did not bring any. I don't believe any extra soil was brought in. I can double check on that and get back to you, though. Yeah.
I don't think so, Holly. And I don't think it was tilled very much either. We actually had like pickaxes out there breaking up the soil, which was an experience.
Yeah, that is true. The students had a great time though. Yeah, I can find out more if people have specific questions about, the installation practices that we used. So this, as part of this project, we also did a series of professional development for teachers. Not only teachers at Green Street, but we also recruited 9 additional schools that were in the Gwynns Falls watershed. So again, thinking back to the idea of creating corridors of habitat, Green Street was our primary demonstration site. And then we had 9 other schools nearby where we planted smaller scale pollinator gardens with those teachers. And so we brought in at least 2 teachers from every school. We also made an effort to get principals where possible and facilities staff. And did this series of professional developments in partnership with Blue Water and also with Maryland Green Schools with Mayo. And we talked about things like how to create and build and maintain wildlife habitat in all 4 seasons, which is what you see here, prepping for the fall. We also talked about how to incorporate stormwater education with your students, how to use the gardens and stormwater management BMPs in curriculum and outdoor learning. And then that was done, like I said, over the course of 2 school years. And then here is another image from one of the professional developments. We focus specifically on GLOBE, which is global learning and observation to benefit the environment. And this was looking at some soil testing. And like I said, 9 other schools who participated also received smaller scale pollinator gardens, and those were all installed with students and staff. So a couple 100 square feet gardens that we went out and did. And then all of the schools who were involved in the program received certifications and awards through National Wildlife Federation. So they were all registered as schoolyard habitat sites. So counting again towards that cumulative CWH program for the city. And then one program that we're not going to get into today, but NWF has a Green Schools program, which is the largest international green schools program in the world, called Eco Schools. And all schools who participated in this were also enrolled in our Eco Schools program, which here in Maryland, we have a partnership with Maryland Green Schools, and schools can either kind of co-certify or they can use Eco Schools as a stepping stone to becoming a green school. So I wanted to mention that as well. Natalie, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the second example.
Great. So our lessons learned and our work at Green Street Academy is now being replicated in Baltimore County at Watershed Public Charter School. This project was funded by NIFWIF's Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund in 2019, and we actually just wrapped up a few months ago. Through this project, we installed a 600 square foot rain garden with signage, 2 cistern systems capturing runoff from the roof, one of which will go to water a small urban farm that they have on their campus. And we also removed an old impervious basketball court that was no longer being used. We planted 54 trees as well throughout the campus. Like Holly said, we always love to work hands-on with our students and teachers. So the students helped to plant the rain garden and the trees as well. And during this whole process, we also created a green infrastructure master plan for the entire campus and designed 2 additional submerged gravel wetland systems that will capture runoff from the parking lot. And we have those designs and permits ready to go. So we're always looking for additional funding. And our partners thus far in this project were Cityscape Engineering, and they created the master plan, Blue Water Baltimore, of course, the school, Watershed Public Charter School, and St. Gabriel's Church, who is the property owner. Here is the green infrastructure master plan that was designed by Cityscape Engineering with multiple rounds of feedback from the school and church community. Pieces of this project, of this master plan that were already accomplished would be the pollinator garden in the front of the school, which we received funding from the Chesapeake Bay Trust to do that. Our cisterns in the front and the rear, the rain garden, and the impervious removal. And you can see down at towards the bottom, the 2 long kind of tealish parts are the 2 bioretention facilities that we have yet to install, but would love to. And so now we just have a lot of photos demonstrating all of the progress and successes through this project. So this is a before picture of where the rain garden is. You can note over here on the left, there is a storm drain located right there. And so this is having a direct impact on the water quality and the volume of water flowing into the storm drain here. And here's after the rain garden was installed. I took this photo about in August. So this is 3 months after the rain garden was installed. And you can see here, this is a walkway that's leading up to the rain garden. That's has switchgrass on either side. And here's another view of the rain garden. So you can see in the background the 2 white storm drains that are coming from the roof are leading directly, they go into a French drain and they come out directly into this rain garden. And of course, we used all native plants. We have a full plant list if you're interested, and Blue Water Baltimore helped with the construction management of the rain garden construction. Our tree planting was amazing. We planted 54 trees, 14 different species. They were about, there were 7-gallon trees. They're quite large and ranging in 5 to 8 feet. Some of the species included were serviceberry, pawpaws, eastern redbud, multiple species of oaks, fig, crabapple, and black gum. We installed these trees with the help of Blue Water Baltimore and students and their families in a volunteer day back in October 2020. And Blue Water Baltimore is handling maintenance, so routine watering and pruning as needed for 2 years while the trees established, because that's a crucial time for their establishment and their overall success and survivability. Here's another photo of a tree planting from Watershed. And then we have back in May, we were able to plant some of the smaller plants in the rain garden with students. And that was a really great opportunity to have the students come out and get their hands in the dirt and learn a little bit more about the rain garden. They were 4th graders. Here's another photo of that installation. We were planting swamp mallow, a native hibiscus. And we also conducted a series of teacher professional developments. So we had virtual earlier on in COVID when no one was in school. And then this past spring, we did an in-person PD once the rain garden was installed. So topics covered were everything about wildlife habitat, how to create it, how to maintain it, stormwater management, and really exciting, and I think most importantly, how to use the rain garden as an outdoor learning laboratory. And another thing unique to this project, and hopefully will be a lesson learned, and we will continue to modify our educational signage on other projects. Instead of doing one large sign, we decided to do 6 smaller signs throughout the rain garden. We partnered with Open Box 9, which is a professional studio, design studio, and with input from teachers, we were able to create amazing, interactive, thought-provoking educational signage. And also plant identification is so crucial. And so the teachers specifically requested plant tags for all of the different species. So we have some plant tags installed as well. And so we just have some examples, runoff in the rain garden. We have some common aquatic species found in the Chesapeake. This might be my favorite sign of common pollinators. And so you can see we have a student activity at the bottom of each sign. So really prompting the students to guide themselves through this rain garden and answer these questions and really use it as a learning opportunity. We have another sign. This depicts the importance, it explains the importance of native plants and wildlife habitat. We have Coreopsis in the foreground. And then here's just another shot of, so you can see that the signs are placed throughout the rain garden. So it's really allowing students and their families or folks at church who are checking out the rain garden to guide themselves. And back to you, Holly.
Great. So we're going to move now from thinking about schoolyard habitats to thinking about vacant lots or public spaces in communities and how those can also serve as a way to create these corridors or network of habitat and still provide those educational and engagement opportunities for students, for their families, you know, just kind of similar vein to working at schools. And so in thinking about vacant lots, there is an ample opportunity to transform vacant land into usable, safe, and accessible green spaces, and to create those corridors for wildlife and provide those educational benefits. So we are going to show you a video. Let's see. Let's see if I can do the new share. Did that work, Natalie or Drew?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna play it and hopefully the sound works.
I'll holler if it doesn't.
Okay, and this is particularly about a program that we just completed in Philadelphia, working on vacant lots. So we'll talk a little bit more about it, but this is just an introduction.
I mean, for me, it's inspirational and it gives me hope in seeing investment from the city, from nonprofits, from community members, transforming lots that are public health hazards and eyesores and dangerous and turning them into usable, safe, beautiful green spaces.
Yeah, I love it. It's making a difference. It's making an impact in people's lives. The city of Philadelphia is the post-industrial city, and so we have a lot of vacant lots in the city. And unfortunately, most of them, whether they're privately owned or city-owned, don't have the capacity to maintain them. And so they grow heavy weeds, and people dump their trash on there and their debris, and it's an eyesore. It's not something that people deserve to live by. So that's where we at PHS come in. So we have our Philadelphia Land Care program, where we completely clean and green these vacant lots so that what was formerly a terrible eyesore is now a community asset, which people can use and people can enjoy, and they feel safer around.
Through this project, we're trying to change the narrative behind vacant lots and switching it from a detriment and a negative to a community asset, and realizing that we have all this open, accessible land and that it could serve as easy and equitable access to nature and to green space and urban environments, but it can also provide ecological habitat as well.
We've noticed the soil quality has improved, which helps with drainage. And we in Philadelphia have a lot of stormwater management issues when it rains heavily.
PHS, their land care program, they'll stabilize a lot and they'll bring in sod and they'll plant some trees, but we are taking this awesome program to the next level, and we're installing pollinator gardens, which serve as habitat for birds, bees, and butterflies and all sorts of critters. These gardens are able to absorb more runoff and stormwater, preventing overflows in sewers. So we're really hoping that not only can we provide habitat, but we can provide water quality benefits as well.
Some of our lots, we collaborate with the Mural Arts program, which they paint these beautiful murals. And then the National Wildlife Federation, in collaboration with a local university, they found that it has a positive impact on the climate as well. So when we have the clean lawn, the mural, and then the added texture and beauty from the gardens, it really creates such a beautiful space for the community. We're also working with 12,000 lots, which is a lot. You can't manage that much through a volunteer basis. So we found it actually to be much more sustainable by hiring local contractors or working with community organizations to maintain the lot itself. And what's great is that we actively search to work with local landscape contractors to help build their capacity. And they hire community members from the neighborhoods that we're working in. And so really, we're investing a lot of dollars to clean these lots, but that money is going right back into the neighborhoods, helping to create jobs, and then it helps kind of build ownership as well.
When you get up in the morning, just taking your kids to daycare, school, you want your community to look right. You don't want to come out, see trash everywhere, or just a mess.
I'm only like 30 days, if that, in, but it's given me a different perspective on everything, as far as beautifying your neighborhood. Even though it's a job, when you go back home and you see a lot when you're blocked, when you're not at work, you're gonna probably want to do something to it. We can't just make every block and every street in the city look good.
Landscaping gave me a different outlook about life. What landscaping really is, not just weed whacking, planting, it's a whole lot of other aspects that go into it to try to help brighten and raise awareness in different communities. I want a contractor to really give me an opportunity that I never had.
I'm here to just get the experience, listen, observe, pay attention to details. There's a lot of lots that need work, and if you can get a lot of positive people and people to work with you, clean the locks up, it's a mess in the beginning, but when you step back and look at it with all the help for the community, it looks way much more nice for the neighborhood.
We would really love to see vacant lot restoration at scale throughout the Mid-Atlantic, and so we are really using this project and this opportunity to learn as much as we can about what has worked and what hasn't, so that we can really bring this to other cities and make it a stronger priority.
Great. Can you see the back to the PowerPoint slides now?
I see your YouTube slide.
Hang on. Okay, we're good now?
Yep, looks great.
Thank you. So over the past few years, National Wildlife Federation has started thinking more about vacant lots as an area of opportunity. And we're going to talk briefly today about two different project examples, one in Baltimore and one in Philadelphia, which you just heard about. So the first is from Baltimore. This is a project that we did in Druid Heights neighborhood in Baltimore. And this is a before photo from 2017 of what the lot originally looked like. National Wildlife Federation was brought in by the community to help with the fundraising and help with the grant management and the construction management. The community had already come up with a design with actually support from Chesapeake Bay Trust, Chesapeake Conservation Corps member helped to do that design with the community. And we received funding for the installation from Chesapeake Bay Trust G3 grant, Green Jobs, Green Streets, Green Towns. And our partners were the Druid Heights Community Development Corporation, who is actually the landowner for this lot, University of Maryland Medical Center, who did also secure some CBT community engagement mini grant money, International Landscaping and Design, who did the design with the community and then also did the installation as well. This is another before photo of what the lot originally looked like. What it doesn't show is that there was a significant problem with dumping as well. There was a lot of mattresses, old tires that the community constantly had to clean up. And this is a double vacant lot. So this is where two houses would have been, 2-row homes. And this is an after photo. So we installed the nature play space in 2019. It was designed to engage children, providing an alternative to a traditional playground. So it has features like a labyrinth that you see right there, those circles of stones. In the front of the lot, I'll show you other pictures, has a stump jump, it has a sand pit, and then it uses native plants in the entire lot. And in the front, we have a demonstration pollinator garden. And then in the back right of that photo there is a rain garden, and there's a dry riverbed that runs into it, capturing runoff from the neighbor's roof as well as the rest of the lot. This is the front. So this is on McCullough Street where you would enter the lot. The sand pit I talked about and the stump jump, and then we also have a little hopscotch. And the murals were not there originally, but in the process of putting this in, there were 2 murals on each side that were actually installed by the community. And then this is a more recent photo. So this is from this month, actually. We did have some challenges with maintenance over COVID. The Druid Heights CDC is responsible for maintenance as the long-term landowner, but we have been partnering with them to help bring out community volunteers and work on their long-term maintenance plan. And so during COVID, they had trouble getting folks out there to help. And so we've been out there more recently, just making sure that the lot is back to looking its best. And we were actually out there this past weekend with a team of volunteers. There was a lot of students that came in from Morgan State University, as well as some community volunteers. And this is what the lot looked like this weekend. And then we also, obviously signage is so incredibly important. This is an image of the sign we installed. I should have put in a picture that we just put in a brand new sign in the front of the space. But this really outlines the design and then goes through each of the features and the intention behind those features. And then we also had plant tags on the plants in the lot. And Natalie, do you want to talk about the Pennsylvania program?
Sure thing. So I'm going to give a little more detail into our project that the video shared with you all already. So NWF, we've been working with the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, or PHS, to transform a network of 26 vacant lots into a pollinator corridor through North and West Philadelphia around Fairmount Park. So we really were trying to create a pollinator corridor surrounding this park. And with support from the Wildlife Conservation Society's Climate Adaptation Fund, NWF and our partners installed 50 gardens, each 300 square feet, climate smart pollinator gardens, I should say. The goal of this project was to determine an ideal planting palette for vacant lot restoration, taking into account both ecological and community benefits, as well as the ease of maintenance that can be scaled up in Philadelphia and other mid-Atlantic cities like Baltimore. We worked closely with a professor from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Dr. Chris Swan, to conduct research related to the stormwater benefits of pollinator gardens. And then we also partnered with the American Planning Association to disseminate these findings to their network of urban planners. This was in 2019, feels like a lifetime ago. Because this was such a large scale project, we worked with a local contractor to install all 50 gardens. During this week-long process, we put 15,000 native plant plugs in the ground over the course of the week. And so like I said, 50 gardens, but on 26 different land care lots, because those lots vary in size. So this picture here, there's actually, I believe, 3 pollinator gardens on this one large lot. Here's another example of one of our lots. So this is a before picture taken in October 2019. You can see that the contractors came in, they did remove sod, they tilled, and they added topsoil to this. So unlike that pollinator meadow at GSA, we did do a little soil modification here. Sites were selected in partnership with community organizations. So Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, or PHS, was really our liaison for other community organizations, and they conducted that outreach to see where folks would most like to see a pollinator garden. Some other indicators we were using for great site selection were existing murals, lots that were already activated and used by the community, high visibility, exposure to sunlight, of course, and our garden shapes all varied from lot to lot. So you can see here that we have a pretty unique V shape that still measures out to 300 square feet. All species, we used 14 different native plant species native to the Mid-Atlantic region and that are able to withstand harsh environments like a vacant lot. Each pollinator garden was randomly assigned a mixture of 4, 6, 8, 10, or 12 species because we were conducting research on these lots trying to find out the ideal planting palette. And here is an after shot of, like, I just absolutely love this picture, and what a transformation. This photo was taken in June 2020. And you can see that this tiny little parcel of land that was just grass at one point now serves as really great beneficial wildlife habitat, stormwater, BMP, and it's beautiful. And so working with Dr. Chris Swan from UMBC, we conducted research on all 50 pollinator gardens in August 2020. We were really hoping to have more of his grad students out, but given the fact that we were still very much in the fits of COVID and continue to be, we just went out with a group of 5 of us. And we really wanted to know if different native plant species in their varying quantities and combinations had an impact on the garden's resilience in the face of climate change and its ability to absorb water. We wanted to find the most successful and aesthetically pleasing planting combination to inform vacant lot restoration projects throughout the Mid-Atlantic. And so we did that also in part by disseminating our findings with the APA. So at each of the 50 gardens, we recorded overall plant survivability, the plant height. So we measured the tallest plant of each species. We measured the PSI, the soil compaction in the pollinator garden, as opposed to the rest of the lot that was just grass. And then we were also looking at soil moisture in the pollinator garden versus the lot as well. Before I jump into our findings, I just absolutely love this photo, and it's one of my favorite gardens. As you can see, it is literally the only beneficial plant material in the foreground. With the background is a huge, some sort of electrical utility facility or infrastructure. But anyways, we found that, so given our research and Dr. Chris Swan calculated all this data for us, we found that the number of plant species, so like I said, we had varying numbers of, let's see. I'm realizing that we're running a little tight on time, so let me just get in this, go faster. So that the number of plant species did not influence the garden's ability to absorb stormwater. In fact, on average, the surrounding lot had a higher soil moisture rate than the pollinator gardens themselves. So that data suggests that the soil in the gardens is well drained, as the plants are taking up more water than the surrounding turf, which makes sense. And as the gardens are using water more efficiently, they're able to help infiltrate more rainwater and prevent excess stormwater runoff during high volume rain events, which are more likely to increase with time due to climate change. And we know that oftentimes the hardest part of a project is maintenance. And I saw a lot of questions popping up in the chat regarding maintenance. Well, you can address those in just a minute. But we see ample opportunities to use these gardens as part of clean and green teams that pay and train local community members to maintain them. Also just amazing workforce development programs as well. This project was so successful because of the maintenance. Through this grant, we were able to employ local contractors from the neighborhood to maintain these spaces. And though they were not experts in native landscaping practices, we supplied them with plant ID books, common weed books, and really a detailed maintenance plan as well. And so in this photo, PHS actually has a, this is called Routes to Reentry. We heard from some of their participants in the video. It is a workforce development program for returning citizens that equips them with skills in all things landscaping. And that wraps it up for us. We have some time for questions. Drew, I will let you dictate how much time we have exactly. Here's our contact information and some really great resources to learn more about our programming.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Holly, Natalie. And yeah, there are lots of really great questions. So some of them you've addressed since they were asked, and some of them are similar. So Natalie, you just mentioned you're talking about maintenance and that being one of the significant parts of the grants. There's a couple questions about maintenance. If there are contracts signed with like the schools, for example, with the schoolyard habitats, or is there training for facilities folks there? How does the maintenance work for these, either and or the schoolyard habitats and the vacant lots?
Yeah. So for all of our projects, we've provided maintenance training. So for the schoolyard habitats, we have made sure to provide that maintenance training to not only the teachers, but also the facilities staff whenever possible that we could include them. I will say some places was more challenging than others to get participation. And ultimately, like for the schoolyard habitat, the school is responsible for maintenance, although that's something that we are thinking about, like different models that we could put forward separate conversation. We're working in Lancaster around schoolyard habitats and thinking about a unique model where we would include community volunteers, the facilities staff, and the school doing different pieces of those projects. So that's something we're thinking about scaling up in places like Baltimore. With other sites like the vacant lots, then for instance, in Philadelphia, PHS is responsible for the long-term maintenance of those sites. They do receive funding from the city of Philadelphia for their Clean and Green program. And so they have lobbied to get additional funding to be able to maintain and install more gardens on those lots. And then in Baltimore, the same thing, the community CDC is responsible for maintenance, but we certainly are going to be an ongoing partner in making sure that they, have the skills needed to be able to do that. And as Natalie said, we feel like the most successful is where you can actually pay someone. So we have, like for Philadelphia, developed some maintenance materials. So things like, putting together a guide of what plants were in the ground, what they should look like, basically, a maintenance guide, a common weed guide, and been able to provide those. And that's been very helpful.
So a quick follow-up, and this is really coming from Laura Lutz of the Bay Journal. Question about, you mentioned the investment in the communities for the paying the people to actually do the maintenance. How does it work with the funding strategies for that type of ongoing maintenance? Is that something like with the original part of grant that maybe if it's an X number of years grant, it's to install it and for a certain period of time to for the maintenance costs? How does that typically work?
Yeah, I think there's different funding strategies, right? And certainly maintenance is something that's a challenge to fund, and that we would love to see more of funding for maintenance, especially as it can be tied to workforce development and training. In our programs, like to the extent we can include funding for maintenance, like the Wildlife Conservation Society provided funding to be able to maintain those lots during the course of the program. And then that's now going to be continued through funding from the city. So I think there's different ways to look for additional funds, but no matter what, it does cost some funding to be able to pay someone to do that. So whether it's additional grant funding that comes in, or there's state or local funding that can go towards a program, which would be even more sustainable than grant funding. That is what we've helped partners to think about.
Another great question we have is regarding community buy-in. I know with like planting trees in urban areas, people just sometimes don't want them because they don't want birds pooping on their car, that kind of thing. There's a question from Nancy about if there's any issue with folks not wanting the plants or the pollinators brought in because of the fear of bugs and bees. Is there any issue like that that you've confronted?
You want to address that, Natalie?
Yeah, sure. I think that's definitely has been a topic of discussion in the past, and we have found that just providing educational materials and resources about the importance of bees and the different types of bees, and that our eastern bumblebee really isn't quite a threat as compared to maybe the more menacing yellow jacket or something like
murder
that.
hornet.
Yeah, or the murder hornet. So that has definitely been an accomplishable task, and we've been able to definitely qualm a lot of folks' fears. But another, I think, more important thing that is around people's and communities' hesitancy to install additional gardens like the ones we're talking about today is their capacity to maintain them. There's definitely some hesitancy because they know oftentimes people don't have the volunteer capacity or the funds to maintain the space, and so they go overgrown and underused. And so we're having conversations with community members and community orgs about building their capacity, partly through community buy-in, but more so getting jobs into the neighborhoods to maintain the spaces.
Awesome. There are so many good questions. You guys in the audience are really killing it. But we only have time for one more. So if your question hasn't been answered, a lot of them have to do with specifics regarding the actual implementation of these projects. Holly dropped in her email into the chat, and so did Natalie. So please feel free to reach out to them if you have any further questions. But one question I thought was really pertinent is from Tally regarding schools inviting local or state legislators to talk about clean water and climate change and wildlife habitat. All of this, has there been any examples of projects that have invited decision makers at the local, state, or federal level to highlight these projects?
So I think the example I mentioned with the Project Green Classrooms, which is a Maryland state initiative signed by the governor through executive order. And so that leadership committee, which is leaders from different state agencies, has come out and toured Green Street Academy and also Watershed Public Charter School in thinking about how do we amplify these projects and make them happen at a greater scale. But I think there is additional opportunity for more civic engagement among students and helping to encourage them to reach out to those legislators. So we have not directly been involved with that work, but I think that is a huge opportunity.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Holly and Natalie, so much. Again, please feel free to reach out to them. We'll drop their emails in the chat again for any follow-up questions. Really appreciate their time and wonderful presentation. But I do want to just segue for a few minutes to give you a teaser of what's going to be coming on Wednesday morning from Sarah Bucci of the, let me share my screen here. 1 second. Forget sharing my screen. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah from the Water Hub at Climate Nexus. She's actually based out of Colorado, but has her roots based out here in the Chesapeake. So I'll give her a more formal introduction on Wednesday, but want to give the next few minutes for her to give a little preview of what's to come on Wednesday.
Thanks, Drew. And yeah, I can share my screen. Let me pull up, I have a little teaser here. And go to, okay. So I will keep this quick, but Drew had asked me to come on and entice you all to join us on Wednesday. So I will just say that we will close out the this 2 days of presentations, which I promise I will have charts, I will have GIFs, and I will have a musical interlude. So I hope you will all stay. I'll do a longer introduction of myself and the Water Hub on Wednesday, but my name is Sarah Bucci. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications with the Water Hub. We're a nonprofit communications organization, and we provide pro bono comm support to the water justice movement, primarily in the West. And while Drew mentioned I live in Denver now, I grew up in the Bay watershed, and before working out West, I was in DC and Richmond for many years, and was a Choose Clean Water member for a while. I was working out East. So very excited to be speaking with you all about how to communicate at the Water Climate Nexus. And I'm going to drop in the chat before we end to a one-pager that will have all the resources that I'm going to talk about on Wednesday as well. And I'll share that on Wednesday too. I'll just say folks might be familiar with the Yale program on climate change communications. That's something we're definitely going to touch on Wednesday, and their research on global warming 6 Americas. I think this is a really interesting research to kind of ground ourselves in on like what America thinks about climate change and different audiences within that, and how we can talk to different folks where they're coming from. And one thing, I share this chart because it does actually give me a little bit of hope. When we talk about climate change, it can be really doom and gloom. I have to admit, like, you know, out West, we are dealing with wildfires and drought. We're in hurricane season right now and have witnessed the loss of life and property and infrastructure across the country. And I am regularly dealing with the existential crisis of our time, but just seeing the fact that more and more Americans over the last decade are become alarmed and poised to act on climate is something that I find very hopeful. And the good news is that, as Drew mentioned at the beginning of his presentation, water is a winner. You know, we can make the link between climate and water organizations as really trusted local partners. The fact that water is a real winning issue and people really care about it and use that as a bridge to talk about both the impacts of climate change on water as well as the solutions that water projects can bring for climate adaptation and mitigation is really exciting. You know, building how we build and power our communities impacts our rivers. Climate change impacts our rivers, our drinking water supplies, and how we move, treat, and heat water takes a lot of energy. So these systems are all really connected. And the good news is that the water projects that we've heard about today really showcase how water solutions multi-solve problems. So I am, very excited to dig into both, here, I'll give a preview of our agenda for Wednesday. So dig into kind of the basics on public opinion around climate change and water, what the polls say. And then we, the Water Hub released a report that we wrote earlier this year called The Opportunity on Water, where we really talk about the opportunity to connect the climate and water conversations and some recommendations around communications. And then I will stop sharing my screen and put that link in the chat. But yeah, really excited for Wednesday.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. I've seen that Six Americas graph before, but I hadn't seen the interactive version of it. That was really cool. Well, thank you everybody for attending. I'm dropping in the evaluation into the chat. If you are planning to attend Wednesday, just hold off. We'd ask to hold off on filling out the evaluation until after the presentations Wednesday, but if you're not able to make it, you can go ahead and complete that evaluation. But thank you so much again to Joe and Holly and Natalie and Sarah for your wonderful presentations this morning. I know I learned a lot, and I thought I knew a lot coming in, and there's always more to learn. Thank you again. Hope to see everybody Wednesday at 9:30. Well, we're going to hear from Jeff Swinehart and Jeb Busser of the Lancaster Farmland Trust and their wonderful work engaging the Plains Sect community up in Lancaster, which as many of us know is a critical area for our efforts to protect and restore the Chesapeake Bay. And then, as you've already heard, we're going to hear from Sarah on Wednesday too. So hope to see everyone then.